This is All About Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things questions and markets related Bitcoin, little b for the currency, and Bitcoin, big B for the network. A collective journey to understand, apply, and use this innovation. All Bitcoin, all the time. I'm your host, Christine Lee. Let's have a live look at Bitcoin right now. The CoinDesk Bitcoin price XBX index currently trading at $57,428. Bitcoin is slightly down about 0.6% over the past 24 hours. The most reliable reference prices for institutions since 2014 are now published under the CoinDesk brand, trusted globally as the leader in crypto news, events, and data. All right, so looking at our top stories, Fidelity is launching a Bitcoin spot ETF in Canada, skipping over the U.S., where the SEC has been hesitant to give approval. Bloomberg saying that if approved, the $4 trillion asset manager will become the largest to offer a physical Bitcoin ETF. Meanwhile, crypto exchange Crypto.com buying North American Derivatives Exchange, or NADEX, and Small Exchange Inc. to expand its presence in the United States, subject to regulatory approval. Both exchanges are part of the North American branch of London-based IG Group, the FTSE 250 listed online trading firm with a market cap of over $4 billion. Crypto.com will use the acquisition as a gateway to trade certain derivatives and futures products for U.S.-based customers. And finally, the jury in Kleiman versus Craig Wright. The civil suit cannot come to a decision. At issue is whether Kleiman and Wright had a business partnership to invent and mine Bitcoin and develop intellectual property such as software. At stake is a judgment of up to $36 billion, the value of the Bitcoin at issue. A mistrial could be declared if the jury continues to insist it cannot agree on a verdict.
The chart of the day is brought to you by Crypto.com, the world's fastest growing crypto app.
Earlier this year, Square and former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey telling an attentive crowd at the Bitcoin Miami conference that if he was, quote, not at Square or Twitter, he'd be working on Bitcoin. Jack Dorsey is Bitcoin's unsung hero, according to ByteTree. While Bitcoin tipping and the framework for decentralizing Twitter was laid during his tenure, with his resignation, Dorsey will now be able to concentrate more fully on payments. This chart showing Bitcoin demand from Square customers raising $13 billion for the Bitcoin network. ByteTree saying that Square is now the #1 public source of demand for Bitcoin outside of funds and exchanges. What happens for Dorsey from here on out? Well, he's made mention of getting into Bitcoin mining, developing a more user-friendly hardware wallet to get people using Bitcoin more easily, and he's also discussed building a decentralized Bitcoin exchange. Joining us now to discuss Bitcoin news and more is CoinDesk Director of Data and Indexes, Galen Moore in Boston. Hello there, Galen. Always good to have you on the show. So let's just take a quick look at Bitcoin first. We see it coming back down just slightly, though trading pretty flat for Bitcoin, shall we say. But what is your take on Bitcoin's price outlook?
Christine, it's been interesting to watch how Bitcoin has performed since Black Friday. Black Friday sort of sounds bad, doesn't it? But it really wasn't a very bad day in the crypto markets. Definitely a tough day in the equity markets and a tough day globally with the news of the Omicron variant and COVID breaking. And, you know, the end to November for equities has been, it's been the first down month for the S&P 500 all year. That all sort of look at that and then
on that too, showing ETH and
that's
BTC
right. Yeah, we have
stocks.
A chart I think looking at returns since Black Friday on Bitcoin, S&P 500, and a couple of other crypto assets. So we're looking here. The red line at the top is Ether. So you know I think we're sort of giving the lie to the notion here that there's some kind of a risk-off sentiment that has pushed Bitcoin down. If it's a risk-off environment, I'm not sure why people are applying capital into Ether. If that would seem to be more of a risk-on investment than Bitcoin. And then at the same time, it's interesting to note the performance of the DeFi category. The green line at the bottom is the CoinDesk DeFi Index, the DFX. And that's a basket of about 10 DeFi assets. About half of it is Uniswap. It doesn't include some of the DeFi 2.0, quote unquote, assets like, for example, Olympus DAO that have been capturing investor interest. But if you look at those have told a similar story, fairly weak compared to what the layer one like Ethereum and even Bitcoin have done. in the past month or two.
Draw any line or correlation between any of these. Can you?
None.
I mean, why is Ether going? No. Yeah, there's not.
Yeah, and again, I'm sorry to sound like a broken record. You could just bring me on. This is the Bitcoin is not correlated to anything segment of the All About Bitcoin show, brought to you weekly by fill in the blank. We can perhaps sell a sponsorship. Once again, I come back to hammer at the point that Bitcoin is an uncorrelated asset. Anybody telling you otherwise, that they have a sort of a correlation narrative that dictates the movements of Bitcoin, is either fooling themselves or trying to fool you.
All right. I do see stocks, though, U.S. stocks slightly down right now, but to argue about or ponder about these correlations is not going to be very fruitful.
I would say day to day, you can see it. It happens, right? You have a day when Bitcoin seems to be moving with stocks, and certainly, there's nothing wrong with that narrative. I just think Bitcoin doesn't hold fast to those narratives over the long term, right? One day it's moving with stocks, and the next day it's moving against.
Pivoting to Fidelity, they are launching a spot Bitcoin ETF in Canada. Very interesting. That's circumventing the United States or the SEC. Is the U.S. losing out?
It's certainly a day to reflect on that. We had SEC Chairman Gary Gensler at a conference on a sort of fireside chat with the former SEC Chairman Jay Clayton, talking about investor protection today. And yesterday, Grayscale, which is a sister company to CoinDesk under the DCG umbrella, had issued sort of the bullet points of a letter that their attorneys had sent to the SEC, saying that approving a futures-based ETF and denying a spot-based ETF is not, in fact, protecting investors, but it's hurting them. I think there's certainly a strong argument to be made in that area. At the same time, Gensler's right to point out that most of the markets where Bitcoin is traded in the spot market are not surveilled, are not supervised, cannot be regulated by the SEC, and so there is some question about where's the protection for investors. I think the argument that I see some rationale in is, if that's true for spot, then it's also true for futures, which are indexed to the spot market.
Well, speaking of what is supervised, inflation is not so transitory. So I wonder what you think that will have in terms of an impact on the crypto markets, that, if the Fed begins accelerating tapering, if they begin hiking rates.
Yeah, I mean, that's I feel like this week is a kind of a screwy environment with that, with the Fed talking about accelerating their road to hiking rates. Especially after what we saw on Friday and the kind of sort of uncertainty that the equity market seems to be in at the moment. It seems like kind of funny timing. Look, I think the inflation. I mean, again, I see Bitcoin as an uncorrelated asset, but the inflation narrative is good for Bitcoin. If I don't see a world in which Bitcoin replaces the dollar goes to zero. The dollar is a very strong product and will continue to be. But I do think as people are concerned about inflation, and perhaps they've been exposed to things like NFTs, maybe they've been exposed to Dogecoin or Shiba Inu. If they're sort of digging and going further down that rabbit hole, they're going to get to Bitcoin at some point.
Finally, any thoughts on Twitter and where, Jack Dorsey may be headed with Square? Do you think he'll be doubling down on his initiatives with Bitcoin at his payments firm?
I see a lot of chatter, Christine, about integrating Ethereum or Ether into Twitter. I think that's a fascinating idea. Somebody I follow on Twitter was saying yesterday, well, this is going to be, Square is going to be the Bitcoin company and Twitter is going to be the Ethereum company. Bottom line, I think this is good for Twitter shareholders. It's never good to have one person running two companies at the same time. I think history has not been. There are very, very few examples of people who've been able to do that successfully. It's probably good for Twitter shareholders, and it's good for Jack Dorsey too.
All right, Galen, thanks for joining us. Appreciate your insights. That was CoinDesk Director of Professional Content, a new title there for Galen there. Galen Moore in Boston. Coming up, checking in on Bitcoin mining with RIOT Blockchain.
Hi, I'm Kevin Worth, CEO of CoinDesk, and you're watching CoinDesk TV.
Welcome back. A slew of mining news for you. Bitfarms mining slightly fewer Bitcoin in November as mining difficulty increased. Meanwhile, Bitcoin miner Greenidge Generation is offering additional $35 million in corporate bonds to raise money for capital expenditures and acquisitions, among other purposes. And speaking of acquisitions, Bitcoin miner RIOT blockchain buying electrical equipment provider ESS Metron for $50 million. Joining us now to discuss all the mining news is Jason Les, CEO of RIOT Blockchain. Hello there, Jason. Thanks for coming to the show. So, first of all, let's touch a bit about mining difficulty, coming back to levels before the China mining crackdown came down. Are we back to where we were before the crackdown?
I think we're pretty close, if not there, about to be there. It's a pretty interesting dynamic that took place over this year as the price of Bitcoin is going up and there's so much mining hardware being accumulated and deployed. Suddenly, we see a massive difficulty and drop following the exodus of mining from China in the middle of this year at the start of the summer. That was a very fortuitous event for those who were unaffected by the ban, who were essentially operating as usual, and half of their competition in mining just went off the earth. But markets are efficient, miners are chasing opportunities, and we've seen a reallocation of hash rate around the globe, and we have difficulty back to where it was before, close to back to where it was before, and probably going to continue on an upward trajectory for some time.
You talk about miners seizing the opportunity. So you RIOT Blockchain, of course, is not, holding back. You're making a couple of new acquisitions, buying some miners. I see electrical equipment. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah. Today we announced the acquisition of ESS Metron, a company that engineers and produces electrical components, low voltage, medium voltage, switchgear, power distribution units, a whole host of products. And this acquisition came about because ESS Metron is one of the primary vendors to Whinstone. Whinstone is the massive Bitcoin mining facility that RIOT owns out in Rockdale, Texas. They helped build Whinstone to 300 megawatts, making it the single largest Bitcoin mining facility in North America by that developed capacity. And we are initiated a 400 megawatt expansion plan, actually taking that site to 700 megawatts. And ESS Metron has been a key partner to that growth. So with this acquisition, we're taking greater control of our supply chain. We're helping reduce the cost of build-outs. We're having more visibility into our supply chain and having better positioning ourselves to secure materials. And we're bringing this engineering talent in-house. Bitcoin mining is full of innovation. Everyone, they hear about the miners, they hear about deploying miners, but what doesn't get as much attention is that underlying electrical infrastructure that goes to power all of that. That's very important. And procuring those materials is challenging, just like miners are. So this acquisition is very important to us to help secure our supply chain for our future growth and bring talent in-house to continue to innovate new solutions for making Bitcoin mining efficient as possible.
How are you continuing to address the concerns around environmental impact of these miners, data process centers that consume a lot of energy?
So we operate, right now operates these facilities in two locations. We have a hosting agreement with CoinMint in upstate New York. They utilize some stranded renewable generation power up there, about 90% hydroelectric power. We're operating out in Texas with Whinstone, which is the focus of our operations going forward. And Texas has an abundance of solar and wind generation in its grid. So Bitcoin miners, people might not be aware, use more renewable energy on average than any other major industry. And that's because Bitcoin miners are out there as the buyers of energy of last resort, but also with the flexibility to shut off at different times. We operate out of Texas, and we buy that energy 24/7. Bitcoin mining is a 24/7 business, and we believe that we help capitalize renewable generation projects who are otherwise selling power into that grid when demand is low. And that's a problem. That's an inefficiency in the market that Bitcoin mining helps solve. And on the other token, we have the ability to shut off at any time. Bitcoin mining is not like a traditional data center requiring 24/7, 365 uptime. The amount of work that you do is just as long as the last block that you found or the next block that you're working on. Those are 10 minutes apart. So we are an ally, we are a good corporate citizen in that Texas ERCOT grid because we have the flexibility to shut down and provide power back to the grid when it is in very high demand. And because of that, that's why, because we have that flexibility, I think is why power companies, power operators in Texas, politicians in Texas like the idea of Bitcoin mining coming there, and they're supportive of companies like RIOT who are initiating growth in that sector.
Finally, Jason, are you selling any Bitcoin to make this acquisition, or are you in accumulation phase?
No, we're not. We did not sell Bitcoin to make this acquisition. It was paid off of our balance sheet. RIOT recently completed a at-the-market offering program over the past 2 or 3 months, where we raised approximately $600 million net of underwriting fees. But we have a strong balance sheet right now, and this was funded half in cash and then the remaining portion with RIOT common stock.
All right, Jason, thanks for joining us. Congratulations on this acquisition, seeing a lot of activity in the mining space, so it's very exciting. That was RIOT Blockchain CEO Jason Les. That's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm your host, Christine Lee. We'll do it all over again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in New York for First Mover. You're watching CoinDesk TV.